Thanks, Andrew. Well, good evening. Welcome to the show. Let's start with the tale of 2 Australians killed since October 7. Both tragedies, both devastating. Zomi Frankham and Galit Carbone. Zomi, aged 44, was killed while distributing aid in Gaza this week as a result of an accidental Israeli airstrike. Galit Carbone, aged 66, raised in Sydney and killed by Hamas gunmen on October 7. One of these deaths was entirely accidental. One was a deliberate murder. Zomi's death led to an apology from the Israeli Prime Minister and a vow to hold an inquiry to investigate what unfolded. Galit's cold-blooded murder has seen no apology, no remorse, no inquiry. Zomi's death has led to calls for a war crimes investigation by Australian politicians. Galit's death led to no such calls. While both deaths are utterly unacceptable, what's alarming is the difference in the way Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong and the media have reacted to each death. Here were Albanese and Green Senator Sarah Hanson-Young today.
And what isn't good enough is the statements that have been made, including that this is just a product of war. This is against humanitarian law. International humanitarian law makes it very clear that aid workers should be able to provide that aid and that assistance free of the threat of losing their life.
We need a permanent ceasefire. It's why a short-term pause is not enough. It's why the world's patience is growing thin. It's why Australians overwhelmingly support a ceasefire, because the excuses to continue bloodshed, horror and tragedy just don't stack up.
But Galit's death led to no obvious anger like this from Albanese or Senator Hanson-Young. There were no furious press conferences where the Prime Minister demanded answers from the Palestinians. There were no angry calls to Qatar to demand accountability from the Hamas leadership, which they're harbouring. Nothing like the incensed demands the pair, Albanese and Wong, have made this week of Netanyahu, even though he had already publicly apologised and committed to a full inquiry, as he should have. In fact, while the October massacre was still ongoing, Penny Wong was urging restraint. Where was the outrage? 2 Australian deaths, 2 very different reactions. No enormous public show of anger for the deliberate murder of the Jew versus the full letter of the law for the accidental death where there's been an unconditional apology. This is an absurd moral cover the Australian government is giving to Hamas. White House National Security Advisor John Kirby has made the very clear point that Zomi's death was completely accidental.
The State Department has a process in place. And to date, as you and I are speaking, they have not found any incidents where the Israelis have violated international humanitarian law. And lest you think we don't take it seriously, I can assure you that we do. We look at this in real time.
They have never violated international humanitarian law ever in the past 5 to 6 months.
I'm telling you, the State Department has looked at incidents in the past and has yet to determine that any of those incidents violate international humanitarian law.
Well, and what about the hypocrisy of leaders in America, Australia and Britain lecturing Israel about accidental deaths? These happen often, tragically, in war, as foreign editor of The Australian, Greg Sheridan, points out. Australian soldiers have, on numerous occasions, unintentionally killed civilians in the fog of war.
Albanese and Penny Wong should remember that there's not a single conflict in which Australia has been involved in which our troops have not inadvertently killed civilians. War is terrible and full of grief, but sometimes it's unavoidable.
And he made the same point but went further in The Australian today. He wrote, They should recall that there is not a single war in which Australia has participated in which our soldiers, among the finest in the world, have not inadvertently killed some civilians. He said this is an ineradicable part of the gruesome truth of war, which is always horrible and full of grief, but sometimes unavoidable. Greg Sheridan writes, Wong says Israel must change its ways or lose international support. What does she mean by this? That Israel must unilaterally cease operations while Hamas refuses to release Israeli hostages? He writes that the Hamas battalions in Rafah should be allowed to re-emerge in the backbone of a new Hamas government in Gaza. Very good points there by Greg Sheridan. Well, Israel's government spokesperson Elon Levy said in a tweet that sometimes in war, militaries fighting terrorists make tragic mistakes and brave aid workers get killed. And to make his point, he posted this article where the United States determined that a Kabul drone had killed innocent aid worker and 9 family members. So a United States American drone strike killing an innocent aid worker and 9 family members. But I don't recall the multiple angry press conferences from Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong on this occasion or any other. And I don't remember, by the way, the Israeli Prime Minister coming out to lecture America about these deaths. Of course that didn't happen. And what about the media? Well, here's how the Sydney Morning Herald reported the death of Galit. It's a small mention there up front, but if we can show you another page, it was on page 7, and it was a small story on the side of page 7. Hopefully we'll show you that image in a moment. A small story running down the side of page 7 in the Sydney Morning Herald. And as you can see, or hopefully when we show you that image in a minute, the headline of the story was Sydney grandmother confirmed dead in Israel. But here's how the Sydney Morning Herald reported on Zomi's death today. The front page of the Herald, no less, the front page compared to a small story on page 5. And the headline, Charge Soldiers for Killer Strike, Family Demands. And by the way, it was yesterday's front page of the Sydney Morning Herald as well, with the headline, Fury over Killing of Charity Worker. So 2 front pages in a row for the death of one Australian aid worker, but for the death of a Jewish Australian on October 7, it was a small story on the Sydney Morning Herald on the side of page 5. Now, while I'm on this, let's get another few things straight. For all those inaccurately claiming that Israel isn't allowing aid into Gaza, that is rubbish. The Israeli government says it's close to facilitating the 20,000th aid truck into Gaza. 20,000 aid trucks into the Gaza Strip, 20,000, and that's since October 7. The claims of a famine are questionable at best, as many experts, including Alan Dershowitz and Arab-Israeli journalists and the Israeli government as well, have all pointed out. And as for demanding a ceasefire of Israel, well, Israel has reportedly agreed to the terms of a ceasefire for many weeks now, around 6 weeks now. And it was a very generous deal that it agreed to, releasing many more Palestinians from its prisons than the number of hostages still held by Hamas. Yet it is Hamas that hasn't agreed to this ceasefire deal that's been on the table that Israel has reportedly agreed to for weeks. And why won't Hamas agree to it? Because it won't release over 134 Jewish hostages, including babies and children. Do these Jewish lives not matter to Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese? Because they do to me, and they should to them. Now, I'm going to come back to that story later on tonight when I speak with my panel, Danica DiGiorgio and Jason Morrison. I'll talk about it with them. Also tonight, I'm going to speak with a legal expert on the sensational revelations from the federal court today, and this in the Bruce Lehrmann defamation case. As it unfolds, we're going to look at the Brittany Higgins saga because it looks like she's potentially going back to court to face off against Linda Reynolds. Also tonight, I'm going to be joined by doctor, author and veteran gay rights campaigner Kerryn Phelps. She's going to talk about the time in the 90s when she was outed. Her and her partner, her wife, Jackie Stricker Phelps, were outed by a tabloid newspaper. But now let's get into the big stories of the day with my panel, Basil Zemplis and, I've just had a mind blank, who I've got on tonight. Basil Zemplis and National Senator Matt Canavan. There you are, Matt. We've already been speaking all afternoon.
There it is.
Which is, I've got a lot on my mind, a lot of stories on my mind.
Me.
I would never truly forget you, Matt.
That's fine.
Look, mixed reaction today with the appointment of our next Governor-General, Sam Mostyn. We saw that Janet Albrechtsen in The Australian today dubbed her the worst of modern woke Australia. Meanwhile, my colleague Andrew Bolt has said that she's just a second-tier warrior. Have a look at what he had to say.
This is actually your new Governor-General. A second-tier functionary of the new left, chosen by a socialist left Prime Minister to, and this is the joke, to be the Governor-General, a unifying, supposedly, and apolitical, supposedly, figure representing us all.
And then, as you may have seen on my show last night, former Victorian Liberal Party President Michael Kroger was also scathing of the appointment.
Why does Albo always have to pick someone from the inner city woke brigade, constantly on the government payroll, former Labor staffer? He is constantly in the throes of the inner city woke left. I mean, everything he seems to do is he collapses under the pressure of activism and activists.
Matt Canavan, some of the criticisms of Sam Mostyn, that she's a big climate change advocate, that she's referred to Australia Day as Invasion Day in the past. Do you agree with this appointment?
I think the Prime Minister's made a massive mistake here. And I think the evidence is there for all to see. The proof is in the eating of the pudding here. The appointment of a Governor-General should be, and almost always has been, certainly in my lifetime has been, a unifying moment for the country. This is clearly not one, with the legion of criticism that's coming here from all sorts of quarters about this decision. So the Prime Minister has failed and erred here, and perhaps he should think again. I think this is just a Governor-General elect. It hasn't actually occurred. So maybe there should be a reconsideration here. I mean, I think what normally happens in these instances is that someone is appointed of such stature that's achieved so much in their life that whatever their particular political views may or may not be, Australians can get over those and be proud of their achievements. So, and with all due respect to Miss Mostyn here, I didn't know her beforehand. She's probably a lovely person, but I mean, reading through her career, it's hard to point to what has she done, what has she built, what has she achieved, what has she run. And I'm saying that with all humility. I'm not saying I should be. I mean, I'm not putting myself forward for Governor-General, but somebody that gets appointed to this role probably should have those kind of achievements which all Australians can respect and therefore we all unify behind. And that hasn't happened in this case, and that's very sad.
Basil, it is a controversial appointment, and I'm actually told that she's been a good personal friend of the Prime Minister's himself, so that could have influenced his decision here as well.
Well, possibly. I guess we respect and understand the right of all leaders to appoint people that are known to them or they've got an intimate knowledge of. She has been a successful businesswoman, there's no doubt about that. She's been on the AFL Commission. She's been a community leader. I take all of the points that have been mentioned as reasons why this decision is not universally popular or immediately a unifying decision. I suppose, though, what good Australians do is they respect the office, they respect the role, and it now remains to be seen, how does Miss Mostyn respect that role? What sort of a Governor-General is she going to be? So we have seen some of the comments that she's made in the past. We've known her positions on certain issues. I think we'd like to think that the Governor-General is apolitical and somebody that all Australians can look up to. She still has the opportunity to be that sort of Governor-General, and I guess now it's up to her to be the sort of Governor-General that a majority of Australians would wish her to be. Let's see.
We will indeed. Now let's have a look at new data that shows just how tough the cost of living crisis is hurting Australians. Household spending actually went up 3.6% in February compared to last year, but spending on non-discretionary items rose 6.9%. Matt, many people don't know this about you, but you are an economist by trade or by qualification. So, how do you interpret these figures? Does this show that life is just getting so much more expensive for people that they have to spend basically 7% more on essential items?
Well, I suppose this is what an economist would call a lagging indicator. That is, it's evidence or data that's lagging the real-world experience that we all know. It's not surprising or shocking seeing these figures. I think all of us in our own lives would know and understand when you go to the grocery store and rack up the bill, it's a lot more than you think it would usually be in the trolley. And that's having an impact on all Australians. And I just don't think the Prime Minister fully understands this. His priorities in his time in government have been to try to deliver this voice, now make a big deal of this Governor-General appointment, and there seems to be very little focus on tackling these issues. I mean, the underlying problem we've got here as a country is we are not producing enough, efficiently enough. Our energy prices are going through the roof. That's feeding through the cost of everything. Government spending is being too high during an economic boom. Population growth is too high. And the Prime Minister's not doing anything to tackle these things. He's not cutting spending. He's not cutting the migration rate. We've still got record migration coming to this country. And of course, energy prices are still skyrocketing. So look, people will have their judgment the next year about this, but I don't think the Prime Minister has any answers to the cost of living crisis that is cruelling Australian families right now.
Yeah, look, no answers at all. Basil, I've been really looking forward to having you on the show because we saw polls this week that indicated that voters in WA are starting to turn away from the Albanese government. Is cost of living the biggest factor here, or do you think that the change in the electoral sentiment since the 2022 election is just because, the anti-Scott Morrison factor isn't there anymore?
Well, that's clearly gone, and that was a huge factor in the most recent federal election, which ultimately swept federal Labor to power based on a very significant result here in the West. I think, and as everybody acknowledges around the country, we are a mining state. There are lots and lots of people involved in the mining industry and the mining services and the like, and anything that threatens mining and therefore the livelihoods of lots and lots of West Australians is an immediate red flag. And it's clear with things like Nature Positive that there is not enough consideration given to not only the industry but also the many thousands of Western Australians who have voiced concern about the negative impacts of some of those sweeping changes and the impacts that they could make. I think there is a sense that although the Albanese government have made significant attempts to get here and have a physical presence, lots of visits, federal cabinets come over, all of those sorts of things, they've been box-ticking exercises. But are they really listening? And do they understand what is important here in Western Australia? And the answer, based on the most recent polling, is no. The view of West Aussies is it's not really being taken seriously.
Now, Matt Canavan, you've got into quite a big fight with Get Up. Tell us what's going on.
Yeah, well, Get Up are trying to raise money off the back of me, basically. That's what they're doing. They put this long email to their supporters today. I'm not one of them. I didn't get the email directly, but I got flicked it to me by a number of people who track these things. And, yeah, they've written a long email saying I'm terrible and some evil person and please chip in to send them money because now I would like to see the Northern Territory shock horror get over its shocking gas shortage and actually drill for new gas resources so they can maintain their economy, possibly also help the rest of us as well. They raised in their email that, I did help support and build the Adani mine. I campaigned to get the fracking ban in Victoria removed, and they're both things I went up against Get Up on, and they lost, and I won, and we did win Adani, we did win the fracking ban in Victoria, and the world hasn't blown up, I don't think, but the Get Up just keep losing debates and fights, and I think they're going to lose this one too, because I know people in the Northern Territory don't want to run out of gas. They don't want their lights to go off. They don't want to lose all their industry. They're going to have to.
So there's good news and bad news for you tonight, Matt. Sharri might have forgotten your name, but Get Up haven't forgotten your name. So you're still world famous in lots and lots of ways. So there's a positive and a negative in there for you tonight, Matt.
Oh, I didn't really
I might not be big on Sky News, but I'm massive in Paddington.
It was just a momentary lapse. I apologise.
We understand.
Matt.
We all do it. We all do it.
What happens to the best of us, Sharri?
A big story today. No, I'm not going to be able to be so harsh on Joe Biden. I'll have to scrap that topic because we were going to have another go at him tonight for being so forgetful. But it came back to me in 10 seconds. Basil, another big story today about AUKUS. Look, this is just delay after delay after delay. And now it looks like the AUKUS security pack, the nuclear-powered submarines that Australia was scheduled to buy from the US in the early 2030s, already running another 2 to 3 years late. Look, the problem with this is that it's just leaving us. And it's not the America's fault. It's our own defence minister's fault, and over many successive governments, that we just don't have the infrastructure in place should we need it in 10 years' time.
New home builds and nuclear submarines, they are never, ever going to be delivered on time. These are significant delays. I think with one of them 24 months, with the other one 36 months, and it does potentially leave us exposed. You would hope, by the way, that it's a fixed price. I don't know if it is. Matt might know that. But you would hope that we don't have to continue to pay inflated prices based on when the delivery date is. It is a worry because this technology is a cornerstone to our future defence structure, and we were expecting these to be delivered significantly earlier. So it remains to be seen how the Albanese government and defence are able to cover the absence of this new equipment long after it was expected to be delivered. But it does also demonstrate that the forward planning required here, the necessary setup, if you like, to have options or backups in place, it's also important, and the delivery oh so unreliable.
Yeah. All right, Basil Zamplis, Matt Canavan, thank you both so much for your time tonight. Now, just before we go to a break, we have some devastating news that terminal cancer patient Asher Dinnan has passed away. You may recall we had him on our show earlier this year. He was talking about how he'd spent his precious time fighting the federal government in court for access to NDIS funding that he should have received on his first try.
The last thing I wanted to spend the majority of the last year doing is fighting a broken system. But the reality is, if I hadn't have fought, I wouldn't have access to be able to live as I wish and as I have a right. I'm in a position where I have people and the support around me that help me fight the system. But the reality is there are thousands of Australians around the country that don't have my support and are falling between the cracks.
Yeah, it's just terrible that people with terminal brain cancer are having to spend the last months of their life fighting to access the NDIS. And instead of only using what energy he had left to spend time with loved ones and to do the things that made him happy, Asher had to spend thousands of dollars fighting for care in the final months of his life due to a lack of action by the federal government. And as a country, this is shameful. I also just want to say we send our warmest wishes and hugs to his family who'll be suffering at this time. Now, coming up, the latest on the sensational court revelations in the Bruce Lehrmann defamation case. Also, why Brittany Higgins and Linda Reynolds are set to head back to court. We'll talk about all of that and cross to the federal court after the break. Welcome back. Well, a court has heard that Channel 7 reimbursed Bruce Lehrmann for sex workers and cocaine ordered on a night out with their staff. The explosive claims were made by a former Spotlight producer, Taylor Auerbach, whose evidence caused the defamation trial to be reopened. Senior reporter Caroline Marcus was at the federal court and she filed this report.
Taylor Auerbach had been tasked with babysitting Bruce Lehrmann as the Spotlight program attempted to secure an exclusive interview with a former Liberal staffer who had been accused of rape by Brittany Higgins. Mr. Auerbach told the court Mr. Lehrmann ordered a bag of cocaine during a dinner at a top Sydney restaurant with Spotlight producers in January 2023, before he and Mr. Auerbach went back to a serviced apartment. He claimed Mr. Lehrmann then put the drugs on a plate before talking about ordering sex workers and Googling escort websites. Mr. Auerbach recalled texting a colleague, "Bruce is on the warpath again, this is effed." He said Mr. Lehrmann later asked Seven to reimburse him. He got in touch with me to say his bank account was dry after, for want of a better word, the bender. The plan was he was to issue an invoice for per diems that would be paid for by Seven. He said the incident followed another night a few weeks earlier in which thousands of dollars were put on a Seven corporate credit card for massages ordered from Mr. Lehrmann. Claims Mr. Lehrmann has earlier denied. Mr. Auerbach said he told his bosses after that incident the expenses were incurred in a drunken haze and had nothing to do with work, but claimed in court they were actually for Mr. Lehrmann. He offered his resignation to Seven, but claims his bosses instead promoted him and gave him a pay rise. Mr. Lehrmann's lawyers put it to Mr. Auerbach that he was willing to do anything to hurt his former employer, playing this video of him destroying a colleague's golf clubs. "I want to suggest you are here today to cause as much damage as possible to your employer. Strongly disagree. And you're prepared to lie in that endeavour? No, sir." Mr. Auerbach also claimed he'd suffered sustained bullying and anti-Semitism at Seven, claims also denied by the network. Do you reject the idea that he might have suffered?
Of course I do.
Bruce Lehrmann's defamation trial was reopened to hear the new evidence from Mr. Auerbach, which may go to issues around Mr. Lehrmann's credibility and how much damages he may be awarded if the judge finds in his favour. Mr. Lehrmann is suing Network 10 and presenter Lisa Wilkinson over an interview with Ms Higgins in which she claimed she'd been raped at Parliament House. Mr. Lehrmann has always denied any wrongdoing. Taylor Auerbach will be called back to the stand on Friday, and the judge has said he hopes to deliver his verdict as early as next week.
And Channel 7 has responded to the allegations made in court just this evening. A spokesperson for the network released a statement that says 7 is appalled by the allegations made in recent days. "We do not condone the behaviours described in these allegations. They do not reflect the culture of 7. 7 did not offer a promotion or pay rise to Mr. Auerbach in November 2022, nor did it do so at any time after that. 7 did not reimburse Bruce Lehrmann for expenditure that has allegedly been used to pay for illegal drugs or prostitutes and has never done so. 7 notes the matter remains before the courts. 7 also takes issue with the allegations recently made about its conduct. Contrary to the claims reported in the media, 7 complied with all of its obligations in relation to producing documents in response to subpoenas issued to it. 7 has at no point asked anyone to delete or destroy evidence. As previously stated, 7 did not condone or authorise the alleged payments to Mr. Lehrmann referred to in the affidavits recently made public. The person involved admitted to the misuse of a 7 corporate card and all unauthorised expenses were immediately reimbursed. 7 has acted appropriately at all times. Wow, that's some version of spin there after today's sensational allegations. To unpick the truth, let's bring in the Rule of Law Institute of Australia's Chris Merritt. Chris, thank you so much for your time. We should say, of course, that Taylor Auerbach did on the stand today deny that he had admitted to misusing the corporate card. So just including that denial there because he has threatened defamation on that point to others. Now, what does this say, this evidence? Because this is kind of a sideshow, the culture at Channel 7. We're going to come back to that in a minute. But what does the evidence actually say about Bruce Lehrmann's credibility and how could it affect his defamation case against Channel 10 and Lisa Wilkinson for their original interview with Brittany Higgins?
Look, it goes to his credit in this regard. He has denied on oath that he provided 7 with confidential material from the criminal proceedings in the ACT that was not public, hadn't been used in the court. The evidence from Mr. Auerbach is that that is not correct, that he provided a vast amount of material. Now that raises interesting scenarios down the track. It's already been asserted by 10 that this amounts to a gross misuse of the court's process, abuse of process, and Mr Lehrmann should be referred for prosecution for contempt of court. Now the problem for Mr Lehrmann is that he's a law student, he's studying law, he wants to practice law. A finding by the federal court that he's given untrue evidence, and that's all, that will probably be sufficient to make it almost impossible for him to be admitted as a lawyer. So there are problems for down the track for his future career prospects, but there's also this possibility that the judge might actually take up 10 on its suggestion and refer him to Mr Lehrmann to the ACT authorities for prosecution for contempt for breaching an undertaking of confidentiality to the ACT Supreme Court. So this could completely backfire on Bruce Lehrmann. For a while it looked as though he was winning, but I think the introduction of this new evidence from Mr Auerbach has certainly changed things. If he wins, I think it will go to the amount of damages that he received. There's arguments that he should receive 0 damages. I think he's got problems.
I think Seven also has problems as well because there were 2 subpoenas issued during the court proceedings for all communications between 7 employees or contractors and Bruce Lehrmann. They produced no documents, and yet Taylor produced documents which include Mark Llewellyn, the executive producer of the investigative program Spotlight, and Bruce Lehrmann and Taylor, the 3 of them messaging. So there were at least some documents to produce, not to mention the photographs of the text messages and various other things. So how does Seven get out of this problem?
I think they need a better explanation. The explanation that I've seen is basically that the first time they had what effectively amounts to a superficial look and didn't find everything. I don't think that's good enough. If you're served with a subpoena, that's pretty serious. It requires a serious effort. So I think there's problems there in their methodology, their internal methodology. However, that said, the accusation that they signed off on an invoice for drug use and prostitution, I find incredible, and I think that would need solid verification, documentary verification for that to fly. I can't see any corporate finance department signing off on something like that.
Yeah, I think the suggestion was that it was through a per diem. So and I was watching it today, and the Justice was asking questions about what evidence there is for that. You'd think they should just subpoena Bruce Lehrmann's bank records and see if there was a per diem paid by 7-7. Obviously, we just read out their statement. They denied that they paid for any of that material. They've denied that they didn't properly comply with court orders. But this has been a shocking week for Channel 7. It has exposed a culture, at least among some of their employees, that is a boys' club, that's grubby, and it's a serious reputational issue for the top-rating network, and it's a problem for the new chief executive, Jeff Howard.
Look, I agree the accusations go that far, but you need to be cautious about this. These are unproven accusations at this point. We'll need to see what the judge concludes. At the moment, it's a bit like he said, she said. Pick your favourite witness. So we'll see if there's any supporting witnesses, any supporting documentation, whether there's witnesses that Seven can wheel out.
Well, there's at least Samantha Maiden's article, which predated all of this, showed that in the bid to lure Bruce Lehrmann, there was this activity of masseuses that was used, whether or not Seven paid for that, the money was reimbursed, but that is still a culture among a Seven employee.
I agree. There's a difference between a cultural problem and a corporate financial problem, and I think it's pretty clear there is a cultural problem.
Chris Merritt, always appreciate your analysis. Thank you very much. Now, coming up, the war in Gaza and the escalating rhetoric from our government, plus why the polls are pointing to a Trump presidency. I'll be joined by Jason Morrison and Danica DiGiorgio after the break, and Kerryn Phelps still coming up. Welcome back. Well, at the start of the show, I spoke about how Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong had given very different treatment to the deaths of two Australian women in the Middle East. Galit Carbone was killed on October the 7th. She was a Jewish Australian Israeli. But then this week, with Zomi Frankham's death, an Australian aid worker, an accidental death by Israel for which it's apologised, they were furious and expressed that outrage repeatedly. Both deaths unacceptable, tragic and devastating. The media also, I said, had treated them differently. Here you can see the Sydney Morning Herald's front page from October, or this is today's front page, sorry, on Zomi Frankham's death. They say, charge soldiers for killer strike, the family demands. Front page of the Sydney Morning Herald. It was front page 2 days in a row. But back on October 12th, let's have a look at their story. Page 7, you can see it there, yellow highlight. A small story on page 7 in the Sydney Morning Herald for the death of the first Australian woman, a grandmother aged 66, in the Hamas attacks of October 7. Joining me now, Sky News host Danica DiGiorgio and commentator Jason Morrison. Welcome to you both. Jason, what does this tell you about the different approach from the left media and our left-wing government?
Well, the left media are often very simple in their approach to things. You know, Israel bad, Gaza victims. Hence, coverage is put through the prism of that, and it's quite easy to pick the good and the bad guy when they look at it like that. The Prime Minister and Penny Wong are breeze sniffers. They're looking to say what is what people expect us to say, not what is what's right to say. Because where their rhetoric is going, they're kind of putting themselves in the situation where they're in an odd way saying, well, the solution just simply is, a terrorist organisation stays in command on the other side of the fence, and that's the future of Gaza, and that's the one we're comfortable with, which has never been Australia's position. Australia sort of talks in these lovely motherhood statements about what to do in the Middle East, but, you know, we have a fundamental ally there that has got people around it that want it condemned and wiped out. And the more that the Australian political elite are kind of pushed into this, the more they're more likely to go to the very simplistic option, and that is to sort of say, oh, all we want is peace and harmony. You know, love is all we need. But the truth is, it's not as simple as that.
But also, to get to that position, you can't now have Hamas in continued control because there was a ceasefire before October 7th. I think the interesting point that several have made, including the Australian's foreign editor, Greg Sheridan, and I showed his comments on air earlier, is that this has happened before, even wars where Australian soldiers have been involved. There have been accidental, tragic deaths, inadvertent deaths.
Yeah.
And we didn't have the anger from Australia, the US and Britain then.
No, and Greg Sheridan made a really good point. In the end, when you go into war, it is a dangerous, unpredictable and very volatile situation to put yourself into. And it is tragic what's happened to this humanitarian aid worker. And sure, there has to be an investigation, but we need to look at this from the broader context. The silence from the left is deafening, not just from the media, but also from the government. The language has been, in my opinion, rather inflammatory and quite frankly disturbing. We had Penny Wong come out today saying, quote, unless Israel changes course, it will continue to lose support. What a ridiculous statement. What exactly does that mean? Israel is not the enemy here. Hamas is the enemy. They were the enemy when they went and killed mercilessly Jewish people on October 7, raped women, and yet the left are silent, as always. And I do think there needs to be an investigation, Sharri, into what has happened to this humanitarian worker. But in the end, Israel has a right to defend itself, and it needs to stay true to its core.
There needs to be an investigation, and there will be an investigation, because, you know, for all that people want to demonise Israel and whatever else, it's a liberal democracy, and that's how it behaves. And you know, most of the left we speak of, and the fringe dwellers, and some of the real simplistic political, tasters of this, they forget that they are in fact dealing with, a country that is,
politically similar in many respects to a Western democracy. They want to behave like that.
We saw it with the rape, the fact that Hamas raped Israeli women, and the Me Too brigade were completely silent on this issue.
Agreed.
Yep.
Very disappointing. Now, former NBA star Andrew Bogut has accused the AFL of covering up a blatant substance abuse problem through their secret drug testing program. And this comes after a former Melbourne Football Club doctor claimed he performed off-the-book drug tests to help players evade detection on game day. Jason, this is obviously a big story about Andrew Bogut here. What do you make of his claims?
Well, I believe him, and I don't think he has any motivation to lie on this front, other than the fact that he thinks sport should be clean. There is a problem there. I mean, there's a cocaine culture problem that exists in high levels of society, be it, in this case, a sport, in the media. I mean, I'm watching something play out at the moment which is all about cocaine, and there's a big problem with that intertwined with this whole case that's going on with in the federal court at the moment. And then you go another step and you say inside politics and whatever else is a big issue. We kind of pretend it doesn't exist. We kid ourselves. And it used to be that, once you used to know the people who were on it, now I know the people who aren't on it.
Yeah.
And that's how much it's turned around. And I imagine Bogut's probably had enough with it.
I mean, he even claimed that players were offering him drugs on a night out.
Yeah, and I'm also, like Jason, I'm completely not surprised by this story. But this is something we hear all the time. Look, we obviously hold these players to a very high level because they are athletes, they are role models to young children, but it doesn't mean that what goes on behind the scenes is necessarily clean. The AFL have investigated drug issues in the past. I mean, I remember even when I was living in Perth, for example, under Ben Cousins with the West Coast Eagles, it happened then. There was accusations that the West Coast Eagles were covering it up because Ben Cousins was their star player at the time. So Andrew Bogut's claims that the league is covering it up as well, they don't surprise me. There does need to be an investigation into this, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Jason Morrison,
thanks, Sharri.
Danica DiGiorgio, thank you so much, both of you, for your time tonight. Now, after the break, prominent gay rights campaigner, former politician Kerryn Phelps will join me live to speak about her new book. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Well, my next guest, Kerryn Phelps, has led 9 lives. She's a GP. She served as the president of the Australian Medical Association. She's a prominent gay rights campaigner. She was appointed as Deputy Lord Mayor of Sydney, and she was the first independent candidate to win the traditionally blue ribbon Liberal seat of Wentworth. She also is a writer and has just published her memoir, The Power of Balance, and she joins me now. Kerryn, welcome. Look, you've written about being outed in the media in the Sunday Telegraph in 1998 when they reported on your and your wife Jackie's wedding in New York. Look, it was so strange reading that chapter and looking back now that there was so much fuss in the late 90s about you and Jackie getting married. It was even a big topic on Talkback Radio at the time. How tough was that for both of you, being outed on page 3 of the biggest selling newspaper in the country?
On the day that it happened, it was an incredible shock. We certainly weren't expecting it. We'd been over to New York to have a wedding ceremony. We knew it wouldn't be legal anywhere in the world, and it certainly wasn't going to be legal in Australia for a very long time. We came back to Australia. We had a party back here, and then within a few weeks, we were outed in the Sunday press. And so when we saw that, we were really shocked, and we started to get quite a lot of inquiries about it. And we made a decision at that time that we could either just be quiet about it and wait for it to all quieten down, or we could actually step up, speak up, and become spokespeople on not only the issue of marriage equality and the need for the change to the law there, but also the change to other laws that were discriminating against LGBT plus people. And that set us on the road to being activists.
I should mention that I first met you through Jackie when I was 12 because she was my year 6 school teacher. It was a position she ended up having to leave because the school wasn't supportive of your and her advocacy for the gay and lesbian community. This, as you say, set you on a path for being the front runners of the marriage equality movement. And that was a big campaign that you ultimately won when the legislation was passed under Malcolm Turnbull.
It was an extraordinary moment in the House of Representatives in December of 2017, and certainly after that very difficult postal survey. But it was 20 years of, almost 20 years of advocacy leading up to that. That photo you're seeing there is with the rabbi who married us in New York in 1998. And then we went back to New York for a legal wedding. And then that vision there is with Rabbi Jeffrey Cammons in Emmanuel Synagogue in Wallara when we renewed our vows exactly 20 years after that first ceremony. So it was a long, long journey, but it was an extraordinary journey, and it was the story of a movement. It was a story of this conversation that began, and then more and more people came on board, and ultimately it was a successful campaign.
Yeah. You also write in your book about COVID-19 and the vaccines and how initially we were told that reactions were extremely rare. This was a taboo topic for a long time, and it still is in many media outlets. Both you and Jackie suffered adverse reactions which were debilitating. It continues to be that way for Jackie. What would you say now about the approach to mandate COVID vaccines?
Well, I don't think there's any justification for a continued mandate, and in particular because having the vaccine does not stop the transmission of the virus. And people now understand the fact that the vaccine is not what we call a sterilising vaccine. It doesn't stop you getting the infection. It doesn't stop you passing that infection on. And that there are people who have suffered injuries from those vaccines and not able to have any further vaccines or boosters. Many people have to live fairly isolated lives. A lot of people still struggling for acknowledgement, looking for treatments and hoping for research to be able to help them with their health journey, which is very difficult for many. I certainly see that at close hand at home, and I also see it in my practice with people who've suffered a variety of different reactions to the vaccine. So I'd very much like to see this acknowledged, and I'd like to see it researched and for us to have effective treatment protocols.
Kerryn, you were actually the first woman of Jewish faith elected to the House of Reps, and you joke in your book about how during your conversion to Judaism, you were asked more than once, you're already part of one persecuted minority group, do you really want to be part of another? But seriously, how saddened are you about the anti-Semitism that we're seeing in Australia now?
Sharri, I didn't realise until sometime later that I was the first Jewish woman to be elected to the House of Representatives, and I consider that an honour. And I think it was quite an extraordinary moment in time. But I think when we're looking at events that have transpired since then, the rise in anti-Semitism that we're seeing in Australia at the moment is a great danger to social cohesion, to the way that Australians are able to live in their communities and operate within their communities. And I think that's one of the really very difficult things that we have to deal with here in Australia at the moment in the reaction to what is happening between Israel and Hamas.
Yeah, and it's being reflected globally as well. We've got less than a minute left, but I just want to ask you about Gabby, your daughter who first came into your life when you fostered her and then later adopted her. She's now very high achieving, extraordinary, a testimony to both you and Jackie.
She's a wonderful young woman. I'm proud of all of my children. Gabby is now a lawyer. She's graduated from law school with a very distinguished academic career. She was on the University Senate for a period of time, and I really look forward to seeing where her career goes from here.
All right, Professor Kerryn Phelps, thank you very much. Fascinating memoir, and I'm sure everyone will look forward to reading it. Thanks for your time. And thanks everyone. Thanks everyone for your company this week. It was great to be with you. I'll see you Monday at 8 o'clock. And right now, here's Paul Murray.